A struggling farmer, his hands cracked and calloused from years wrestling a defiant land, didn't know the broken-down luxury car he was about to pull from a muddy ditch contained not just a passenger, but a secret that could either save everything he fought for or destroy the last fragile threads holding his life together. He saw only trouble, wet and expensive trouble, little knowing she saw in him a freedom she'd spent a lifetime running from. A quiet strength miles away from the gilded cage she'd just escaped, miles away from the $3.5 million wedding dress she'd left crumpled on a hotel suite floor. Before we carry on, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and hit the subscribe button for something special tomorrow. The late afternoon sky hung low and bruised over the Nebraska plains, a bruised purple turning an ominous charcoal gray as the first fat drops of rain began to spatter against the dusty windshield of Logan Tate's bird pickup truck. The wind, usually a constant companion, had picked up a frantic edge, whipping strands of his sun-bleached hair across his eyes. He squinted, the familiar ache in his lower back a dull throb against the sharper anxiety that gnawed at his gut. Another failed season, another mountain of debt that seemed to grow taller with each passing day, casting a long, dark shadow over the tired clapboard farmhouse he'd inherited, the land that had sustained his family for generations now threatening to swallow him whole. The bank's final notice felt like a physical weight in his pocket, a crisp, unforgiving reminder that time was running out, that the dream of passing this land onto a future generation, a dream his grandfather had instilled in him with every lesson learned under the vast open sky, was likely to die with him. Hauling a flatbed trailer piled high with rectangular bales of hay down the seldom-used county road felt like an exercise in futility. The hay was meant for the few head of cattle he still clung onto, a last-ditch effort to produce something, anything, that might bring in a few desperately needed dollars before the frost settled in for good. The old pickup, its engine groaning in protest, navigated the pockmarked asphalt, the tires kicking up sprays of dust that were quickly being plastered into mud by the increasing rain. He wasn't sure where he was going exactly, just driving, needing the mindless rhythm of the road to quiet the frantic thoughts in his head. That's when he saw it. A flash of improbable, expensive-looking chrome against the muddy brown of the ditch embankment. As he got closer, the impossible sight resolved itself, a sleek, low-slung car, the kind he'd only ever seen in magazines or on the rare trip into the city, was nose first in the thick, red-brown mud. Its rear end was still angled precariously on the crumbling edge of the road, a testament to a sudden, probably panicked, loss of control. Logan slowed the truck, pulling over onto the shoulder, the trailer swaying gently behind him. He killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening after the rumble of the truck and the rising howl of the wind. Rain was starting to fall in earnest now, heavy sheets that instantly soaked the parched earth and obscured the distance. He opened his door, the familiar scent of wet earth and rain-washed alfalfa filling his lungs, a smell that usually brought a sense of renewal, but today felt merely damp and cold. Standing beside the driver's side door of the maroon-colored luxury vehicle, looking utterly out of place and thoroughly miserable, was a woman. She was tall, even with her expensive-looking high heels sinking into the mud. Her hair, dark and styled in an intricate updo, was beginning to unravel, damp tendrils sticking to her face. She was wearing a dress, something elegant and pale, now speckled with mud and plastered against her legs by the rain. Even from this distance, Logan could see the frustration radiating off her like heat waves. He walked towards her, his worn work boots making squelching sounds in the rapidly forming puddles. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide and startled, a striking shade of green against her pale skin. She had high cheekbones and a sharp, intelligent gaze that was currently narrowed in annoyance and something akin to fear. "Need some help?" Logan's voice was rough, unused to anything more than shouting commands at cattle or the occasional gruff exchange at the feed store. She took a deep breath, visibly trying to compose herself. "Oh, thank God. Yes. Please. I seem to have misjudged the turn." Her voice was crisp, with an accent that spoke of cities Logan had only seen on television. It came out of nowhere and then, well, here we are." She gestured vaguely at the car, a helpless shrug that seemed entirely foreign to her bearing. Logan nodded, assessing the situation. The car was stuck fast, the front wheels buried deep. Looks like it. He didn't ask how she'd managed to put such a fancy car into such an obvious ditch. He didn't ask why she was driving alone down a back road in the middle of nowhere during a storm, in what looked like evening wear. He didn't ask about the wild, slightly panicked look in her eyes. He just saw a person in trouble, and helping people in trouble was what you did out here. It was a simple code, uncomplicated by the financial woes and anxieties that otherwise consumed him. "I'm Logan," he offered, extending a hand that was more calluses than skin. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking it, her hand cool and soft in his. "Charlie," she replied, her grip surprisingly firm. "Thank you, Logan. Truly. Got a tow line in the truck," he said, turning back towards his vehicle. "Might be able to pull you out." "Oh, that would be wonderful," she said, the relief palpable in her voice. Logan walked back to the pickup, rummaged in the toolbox behind the seat, and pulled out a thick, heavy-duty tow strap. He circled back to the stranded car, the rain plastering his worn flannel shirt to his back. He hooked one end of the strap securely to the frame of her car, finding a reinforced point underneath that seemed sturdy enough. Then he threaded the other end through the hitch on the back of his truck, making sure it was tightly secured. "Might be a bit of a jolt," he warned, climbing back into the pickup. "You might want to get back in your car, or stand clear." Charlie opted to stand by the side of the road, pulling her thin dress tighter around her, shivering despite the mild temperature. Logan started the truck, put it in four-wheel drive, and gently, slowly, began to ease forward. The tow line grew taut, the truck's engine revved, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sucking sound of mud releasing its grip, the car lurched forward, its wheels spinning uselessly for a moment, before finding traction on the edge of the road. He stopped the truck, got out, and walked back to disconnect the strap. Charlie rushed forward, a look of genuine gratitude on her face, though it was tempered with dismay as she looked at her mud-splattered car. "It's out," she said, stating the obvious. "Yep, looks like you got some mud packed in the wheels. Might want to drive slow till you get it cleaned off." "Right." She opened the driver's side door, but then slumped slightly. "My phone, it's dead, completely soaked when I tried to call for help. I don't have a signal anyway, been trying for miles." Logan rubbed the back of his neck. The storm was getting worse, the visibility dropping. Driving back roads in this kind of weather without a working phone was a bad idea, especially for someone clearly unfamiliar with the area. Nearest town with a working phone and maybe a place to stay is about 15 miles back the way you came. Storm's coming down pretty hard. Might be better to wait it out. Charlie looked around at the empty fields, the darkening sky, and back at her muddy, potentially damaged car. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face, a mix of desperation and reluctant acceptance. Is there anywhere around here? A motel?" Logan hesitated. The only motel he knew of, the old Prairie Winds, had closed down for renovations months ago. He'd heard rumors they were having trouble getting funding to finish. "Nah, not close. The one back towards town, the Prairie Winds, it's shut down. Closest thing's probably 50 miles away, heading east." A look of utter defeat settled on her features. She wrapped her arms around herself, her shoulders slumping. 50 miles. I can't drive that far, not in this." Logan looked from her, shivering and clearly at the end of her tether, to the raging storm. Leaving her out here wasn't an option. He wasn't a hero, just a farmer with too many problems of his own, but he still had a sense of decency. "Look, my place is only about 5 miles up the road. Got a guest room. You can stay the night, dry off, use the landline in the morning to figure things out." He mentally cursed himself. He could barely afford to keep himself fed, let alone host a guest. But the thought of leaving her stranded out here twisted in his gut. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise. "Oh, I couldn't possibly impose." "It's fine," he said gruffly, cutting off her protest. "Wouldn't leave someone stuck out here in this. Ditch your stuff out of the car, I'll give you a lift." Relief washed over her face. replacing the tension that had been etched there. "Thank you, Logan. You're a lifesaver. Truly." She retrieved a small, expensive-looking duffel bag from the back seat of her car. Logan opened the passenger door of his truck for her. She climbed in. The scent of her perfume, faint, but distinctly out of place, mixing with the earthy smell of his truck cab. Her muddy heels made small, dark streaks on the floor mat. He didn't comment. The drive to his farmhouse was short and silent. The only sounds the drumming of the rain on the roof and the slosh of the tires through puddles. Charlie stared out the window at the passing fields, now blurred by the rain, her expression unreadable. Logan focused on the road, his mind already calculating the cost of the extra meal, the impact of having a stranger in his quiet, solitary life. The farmhouse, when it came into view, was small and weather-beaten, its paint peeling, the porch steps sagging slightly. It wasn't much, but it was home, the only home he'd ever known, and the thought of losing it was a constant, dull ache. He pulled the truck up to the small, detached garage, its doors warped and in ray. "Need of repair." "It's not much," he said unnecessarily, turning off the engine. "It's dry," Charlie said with a small, tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They got out of the truck and hurried through the rain onto the small porch. Logan unlocked the back door, leading her into the kitchen. The air inside was warm and smelled faintly of old coffee and dust. The kitchen was functional but dated, with worn linoleum floors, chipped countertops, and a refrigerator that hummed loudly. "Bathrooms through there?" he said, pointing to a door off the kitchen. "Guest rooms upstairs, first door on the left. Sheets are clean. Should be. My sister, Mary. She usually keeps it decent when she visits." "Thank you, Logan," Charlie said again, her voice softer now, less strained. "I really appreciate this." "No problem." He felt awkward, unsure what else to say. He wasn't used to company, especially not this kind of company. She hesitated at the foot of the stairs. Is there anything I can do?" "Nah. Just make yourself comfortable. I'll find you some towels." While she went upstairs, Logan busied himself in the kitchen, putting on a pot of coffee, the old percolator sputtering to life. He found a couple of clean towels in the linen closet and set them on the kitchen table. He could hear her moving around upstairs, the creak of the floorboards under her weight. When she came back down a little while later, she had changed out of the damp, muddy dress and into a simple pair of leggings and a long-sleeved t-shirt, still clearly high quality, but more practical. Her hair was down now, falling in damp waves around her face, making her look younger, more vulnerable. She was barefoot, her expensive heels presumably left upstairs. "Feeling a bit better?" he asked, pouring them both mugs of coffee, not bothering with proper cups, just grabbing two of the mismatched ceramic mugs from the cupboard. "Much," she said, taking the offered mug with both hands, seemingly savoring the warmth. "That coffee smells incredible." "It's just coffee." He shrugged, taking a sip of his own. It was strong and black, the way he liked it. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the drumming of the rain against the windows. Charlie stared out the kitchen window at the darkening landscape, her expression pensive. "So," Logan said, breaking the silence, "what brings you out this way?" "Not exactly on the main highway." She turned back from the window, a guarded look returning to her eyes. "Just driving. Needed to get away. See the country, you know?" It was a flimsy explanation, even to his untrained ear, but he didn't press. People had their reasons for wanting to disappear, even for a little while. He had his own. "Right," he said simply. She took another sip of coffee, her gaze sweeping around the kitchen, taking in the worn appliances, the simple furniture, the general air of practicality over luxury. "It's very quiet here, she observed. "That's usually the point, I suppose." She paused, then added, "It's a beautiful farm. What do you grow?" "Used to be corn, soybeans. Had a few cattle. This year, not much. Dry." He kept his answers short, not wanting to dwell on the failures. It was hard enough living them every day without talking about them. "I'm sorry," she said softly, and he looked up, surprised by the genuine sympathy in her voice. "It's the way it goes sometimes," he said, shrugging, though the weight of it felt heavier than ever tonight. They talked a little more, about the storm, about the difficulty of rural life, though Charlie's contributions were mostly questions, revealing a profound lack of understanding of his world. She listened intently though, her initial guardedness seeming to soften slightly with each passing minute. She didn't ask about his family, his life before she arrived, and he was grateful for the omission. As the evening wore on, the initial awkwardness began to dissipate, replaced by a tentative curiosity. Charlie, or Charlie, as he knew her, was unlike anyone he'd ever met. She moved with an almost unnatural grace, even in borrowed clothes, and her hands, though she gripped the coffee mug tightly, looked like they'd never known a day of hard labor. Yet, there was a genuine interest in her eyes as he spoke, a refreshing lack of judgment. He, in turn, found himself intrigued by her, by the air of mystery that clung to her, the stark contrast between her polished appearance and her current predicament. He noticed the small details, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the almost imperceptible wince when she shifted her weight, as if she was unused to sitting in a hard wooden chair for too long. By the time they decided to call it a night, the rain had begun to slacken, though the wind still howled outside. Logan showed her back upstairs to the guest room, pointing out the extra blankets in the closet. "Bathrooms just across the hall if you need it," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Thank you again, Logan, for everything. I don't know what I would have done." "Get some rest," he said, and then, on impulse, added, "We'll figure out the car in the morning." He closed the door quietly behind him and made his way to his own room, the old house settling around him with familiar groans and creaks. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the events of the evening. A woman, a mysterious woman with a fancy car and city hands, was sleeping under his roof. It felt surreal, a strange ripple in the predictable, stagnant pond of his life. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was more than she let on, but dismissed it as weariness and the strangeness of the situation. He had enough real problems to worry about without conjuring up fictional ones. Eventually, the exhaustion of the day and the comforting rhythm of the rain lulled him into a restless sleep. Chapter 2. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, but the rain had stopped. A thick mist lay low over the fields, muting the colors of the landscape. Logan was up before the sun, the ingrained habits of a lifetime on the farm, impossible to break. He made coffee, the same strong brew as the night before, and stepped out onto the porch. Breathing in the damp, cool air, the world felt washed clean, though the mud in the driveway and the lingering smell of damp earth were reminders of the storm. He walked over to where Charlie's car sat, still partially on the edge of the road. It was coated in a thick layer of mud, looking forlorn and out of place. He checked the tires, saw the caked mud around the wheel wells, and knew it would need a proper wash and check over before it was safe to drive any distance. He heard movement inside the house and knew Charlie was awake. He went back inside, finding her standing in the kitchen, looking slightly lost. She was wearing the same leggings and t-shirt from the night before. Her hair was still damp and slightly disheveled, but even so, she possessed an undeniable elegance that seemed resistant to the bell circumstances. "Morning," he said, pouring her a mug of coffee. "Morning," she replied, taking the mug gratefully. "It stopped raining. For now. Looks like it might clear up later." He gestured towards the window. "Your car's pretty muddy. Need to hose it down before you try driving it anywhere." "Right." She looked out the window at the car, a small frown creasing her brow. "I suppose I should try and get hold of someone to come get it." "You can use the phone here," Logan said, pointing to the old rotary phone on the wall. It was antiquated but reliable, unlike most things these days. Charlie went over to the phone, picked up the receiver, and listened. A look of confusion crossed her face. "There's no dial tone." Logan walked over, took the receiver, and listened himself. Nothing. Damn. Phone lines must be down from the storm. Happens sometimes out here. Just what he needed. Another complication. Oh, great, she sighed, running a hand through her hair. No cell service, no landline. I'm really cut off, aren't I? Seems that way. He leaned against the counter, considering their options. Roads might be a bit messy too. Probably best to wait it out another day. See if the phone comes back on, or if I can get you into town tomorrow if the roads are clear. She looked at him, a mixture of frustration and resignation on her face. Another day? Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden, Logan. It's fine, he repeated, though the knot of anxiety in his stomach tightened. Another day meant more food, more disruption to his routine. Time he desperately needed to spend trying to salvage something from the farm. But he couldn't just kick her out onto muddy roads with no way to contact anyone. His grandfather's voice, quiet but firm, echoed in his mind. You help folks when they're down, Logan. Doesn't matter who they are. Okay, she said finally, a small, reluctant smile touching her lips. Thank you. Again. I owe you. Don't worry about it. He walked over to the back door. I've got some chores to do. You can make yourself at home. There's some cereal in the cupboard, bread for toast. Can I help? She asked, surprising him. He turned back, looking at her. She seemed serious. He hesitated. What could a woman like her possibly do on a farm? But then he saw the genuine curiosity in her eyes. The slight slump of shoulders that spoke of having nothing to do and nowhere to go. Sure, if you want. It's not exactly glamorous work. I don't expect it to be, she said simply. He gave her an old pair of his sister's work boots and a faded flannel shirt that was much too big for her. She changed quickly and met him outside. The boots were clunky on her feet, and she moved a little stiffly, but she seemed eager. He started with the chickens. The small flock needed to be fed and the coop cleaned. He showed her how to fill the feed trough, the scratch grains spilling a little from her inexperienced hands. The chickens, a motley collection of hens and one noisy rooster, crowded around her feet, pecking eagerly. She initially flinched, but then a small giggle escaped her, a light, airy sound that seemed out of place in the quiet farmyard. They're very enthusiastic, she observed, carefully scattering the feed. They know who's got the food, Logan said, a rare smile touching his lips. He showed her how to collect the eggs, pointing out the nesting boxes. She reached into the straw cautiously, her fingers brushing against the warm, smooth shells. Her eyes lit up with a childlike wonder as she held a still warm egg in her palm. It's amazing, she murmured. Amazing? To him, it was just part of the routine, a small, necessary task. But seeing it through her eyes, he saw a flicker of the simple marvel that he had long since forgotten. Next, he needed to mend a section of fence that had been knocked down by the wind during the storm. It was rough work, hauling lumber, stretching wire, hammering nails. He handed her a pair of work gloves, and she put them on, looking at pride. Her hands, so used to manicures and soft fabrics, now encased in thick leather. Just need you to hold this end of the wire steady while I stretch it, he instructed, showing her how to brace her feet and keep tension on the heavy gauge wire. It was harder than it looked. The wire was stiff and unforgiving. Biting into the thick gloves, despite her efforts, her brow was furrowed in concentration, her lips pressed together. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air. She didn't complain, though, just gritted her teeth and held on. Logan worked quickly and efficiently, the hammer blows sharp and rhythmic. He glanced over at her occasionally, surprised by her tenacity. She wasn't giving up, even when her arms must have been aching. Okay, release, he said finally, securing the last staple. She let go, shaking her hands out, peeling off the gloves to reveal red marks where the wire had pressed. That was harder than I thought, she admitted, flexing her fingers. Takes some getting used to. He felt a grudging respect for her effort. She could have easily just sat on the porch, waiting for him to finish. As the morning wore on, he found other small tasks she could help with. Sorting rusted tools in the cluttered shed, hauling small bags of feed, even attempting to sweep the dusty barn floor, her efforts creating more dust than they cleared. but her willingness was clear. She asked questions about everything, genuinely curious about the rhythm of farm life, the different tools, the purpose of various outbuildings. "What's that for?" she'd ask, pointing at a piece of equipment he considered as mundane as a shovel. "Plowing?" He'd reply, explaining its function in simple terms, surprised by how much she didn't know. It was like talking to someone from another planet. He learned small things about her too, though she offered little about her past or why she was running. She disliked spiders. She loved the smell of fresh hay. She had a surprisingly good sense of humor, a dry wit that surfaced occasionally, making him chuckle despite himself. She was observant, noticing details about the farm and the land that he took for granted. "The way the light changes on the fields in the evening is beautiful," she remarked once, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. He'd never really stopped to notice before. Their meals together were simple, canned soup or sandwiches, eaten at the worn kitchen table. The conversation flowed more easily than he expected, a comfortable back and forth that touched on everything and nothing, carefully skirting the edges of their real lives. The secrets they both held close. He found himself talking more than he had in months, sharing small anecdotes about his grandfather, about the changing climate and its impact on farming, about the loneliness of the endless prairie. She listened, truly listened, her gaze steady and empathetic. It was unnerving and strangely comforting. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed just talking, sharing the weight of his world with someone. One afternoon, while they were sitting on the porch, the sun finally breaking through the clouds, she asked him about his family. "It's just me now," he said, his voice flat. "My folks passed a few years back. My sister, Mary, she lives in the city, visits when she can, but farm life wasn't for her." He didn't mention the woman he'd almost built a life with, the one who couldn't handle the uncertainty, the hardship, who had left him feeling hollowed out and alone. That was a wound that still felt too raw to expose. She didn't push, just nodded understandingly. "It must be hard, keeping it all going on your own." "It is," he admitted, surprised by his own honesty. He watched her over the next couple of days, her initial awkwardness giving way to a tentative comfort with her surroundings. She still looked out of place, but she was no longer shrinking from the dirt or the simple realities of farm life. She seemed to be shedding something, a layer of tension or expectation, and a more relaxed, genuine person was starting to emerge. He found himself looking forward to her company, to the sound of her voice in the quiet house, the unexpected laughter that punctuated the long days. He started to see her, not as the woman from the fancy car, the one who didn't belong, but as Charlie, the woman who held the fence wire steady, who giggled at the chickens, who saw beauty in the changing light. He didn't know how long she could stay. The phone lines wouldn't be down forever, and her absence, wherever she had come from, would eventually be noticed. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the present, on the small bubble of shared time they had created, isolated from the outside world by distance, circumstance, and the lingering effects of the storm. He didn't know the frantic search that was underway, the headlines flashing across screens across the country, the worried pronouncements from a powerful man, the speculation about a missing bride. He didn't know that the woman mending fences beside him was at the center of a media storm of unprecedented scale. He just knew that for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel entirely alone. And that feeling, fragile as it was starting to feel like something he might not want to lose. Carry on till the end. Show thinking the days that followed settled into a rhythm Logan hadn't anticipated. A cadence that, despite the underlying current of financial dread and the quiet mystery of his guest, was surprisingly comforting. Charlie, no longer just Charlie but feeling increasingly like a presence that belonged, continued to help around the farm. She wasn't fast, and she wasn't always efficient, her movements still carrying the subtle grace of someone whose body was more accustomed to Pilates studios than muddy fields, but her willingness was absolute. She learned to scatter feed without sending it flying, to collect eggs without hesitation, her small hands surprisingly gentle with the warm shells. She helped him sort nuts and bolts in the perpetually chaotic workshop, her organizational skills, honed in boardrooms she never spoke of, bringing a semblance of order to the dusty, cluttered space. One afternoon, while wrestling with a stubborn section of irrigation pipe, Logan felt a sharp pain shoot up his arm. He dropped the wrench, his jaw clenching. It was the old injury acting up again, a legacy of a long-forgotten farming accident that flared when he pushed himself too hard, which lately felt like all the time. He leaned against the fence post, breathing heavily, trying to ride out the wave of pain. "Logan, are you okay?" Charlie was instantly by his side, her eyes filled with concern. "Yeah, just old war wound," he managed, trying to grin, but it came out as a grimace. "You should sit down," she insisted, gently but firmly guiding him towards a nearby tree stump. "You're pushing yourself too hard. Gotta get this pipe fixed before the sun goes down," he protested weakly. "No," she said, her voice firm. "You need to rest. Tell me what to do. I can try." He looked at her, at the determination in her green eyes, and against his better judgment, he found himself explaining the mechanics of the pipe, showing her which wrench to use, how to align the joints. He sat on the stump, watching her, offering quiet instructions. She fumbled at first, the heavy wrench awkward in her hands, but she was persistent. She listened intently, following his directions, her brow furrowed in concentration. Slowly, painstakingly, she managed to loosen the old joint, her small victory marked by a quiet exclamation of triumph. Then, following his guidance, she worked on fitting the new section, her movements growing more confident with each turn of the wrench. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the field, the pipe was mended. It wasn't the fastest repair he'd ever seen, but it was done. Charlie stood back, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek with the back of her hand, a triumphant smile on her face. "I did it," she said, a genuine sense of accomplishment radiating from her. "Yeah," Logan said, his voice rough with genuine admiration. "You did. Thanks, Charlie. Really." His arms still ached, but the pain was lessened by the unexpected warmth spreading through him. This woman, this mysterious, out-of-place woman, had just helped him fix his irrigation pipe. It felt significant, a small but tangible bond formed through shared effort. Later that evening, sitting on the porch swing as the stars began to pepper the inky sky, the conversation drifted to dreams and aspirations. Logan spoke, hesitantly at first, about the farm, the weight of tradition, the constant struggle against forces larger than himself, the weather, the market, the bank. He spoke of the dream of making the land prosperous again, of seeing green shoots where there was only dust, of passing something worthwhile on to the next generation, even if that generation felt increasingly theoretical. He spoke of the quiet heartbreak of watching those dreams wither under a relentless sun. Charlie listened, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, the silence stretched, filled only by the chirping of crickets and the gentle creak of the swing. "I understand, in a way," she said softly, finally breaking the silence. "Having a life planned out for you, a legacy you're expected to uphold, whether it's what you want or not." It was the closest she had come to hinting at her own story, a small crack in the carefully constructed wall she had put up. Logan didn't push, but he listened, really listened, to the subtle nuances in her voice, the underlying sadness that hinted at a weight far heavier than anything the farm had thrown at him. "What about you, Charlie?" he asked gently. "What were your dreams?" She was quiet for a long moment, as if searching for an answer she herself wasn't sure of. I used to paint," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Hours and hours, just lost in color and texture. It felt real, like I was creating something that was truly mine. What happened?" She shrugged, a small, self-deprecating gesture. "Life, I guess. Other people's plans got louder. There wasn't time anymore." Her voice held a deep vein of regret. "Never too late to pick up a brush," he said, the words surprising even himself. He, who felt like his own dreams had turned to dust, was offering hope to someone else. A wistful smile touched her lips. Maybe. As the days turned into a week, their connection deepened in quiet, unspoken ways. They fell into a comfortable routine, sharing meals, working side by side, talking for hours under the vast, star-studded sky, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Logan found himself looking forward to the mornings, to seeing her in the kitchen, her hair still slightly messy from sleep, the quiet companionship a balm to his ingrained loneliness. He started making slightly better meals, pulling out old family recipes he hadn't bothered with in years. He found himself noticing the small things, the way her eyes sparkled when she learned something new, the genuine joy on her face when she managed a task she initially thought impossible, the quiet strength that lay beneath her polished exterior. He was falling for her. The realization settled over him slowly, like the morning mist burning off under the rising sun. It was a terrifying, exhilarating feeling. He, a struggling farmer on the brink of losing everything, was falling for a woman who appeared to be from a world so far removed from his own, a world of ease and privilege he couldn't even begin to comprehend. He knew nothing about her, really. Just the Charlie she presented, the one who seemed content mending fences and collecting eggs. The sensible part of his brain screamed at him to pull back, that this was temporary, that she would leave as mysteriously as she arrived, and he would be left with another ache, another loss. But his heart, stubborn and hopeful, refused to listen. For Charlie, the farm was an unexpected sanctuary, a quiet harbor in the storm of her life. Every day spent here, surrounded by the vast, open sky and the honest work of the land, felt like a breath of fresh air after years spent suffocating in a gilded cage. Logan was unlike anyone she had ever met. He was quiet, yes, but his silence wasn't empty, it was thoughtful. His hands were rough, but his touch, when he guided her hands on the fence wire or helped her over a muddy patch, was surprisingly gentle. He didn't talk about money or status. He talked about the weather, about the soil, about the hope of rain, about the history of the land his family had worked for generations. He saw her, really saw her, not as the daughter of a tech mogul, not as a commodity to be married off, but as a person, capable and curious. She hadn't dared to look at the news since she fled. The thought of the media frenzy she had undoubtedly unleashed sent a shiver of dread down her spine. Here, on the farm, she could almost pretend that world didn't exist, that the only reality was the sunrise over the fields, the feel of the earth beneath her borrowed boots, and the quiet companionship of the man who had pulled her from the ditch. She knew she couldn't stay forever. The phone lines would be repaired eventually. The outside world would intrude. But for now, she clung to this fragile peace, this unexpected chance to discover who she was when stripped of the expectations and obligations that had defined her life. She found herself looking at Logan, really looking at him, seeing the lines of worry etched around his eyes, the weariness in his posture, but also the quiet strength, the integrity, the deep connection he had to this land despite the hardship. She saw a man who was struggling, yes, but who was also resilient, kind, and real. And slowly, tentatively, she found herself falling in love with him. It was a terrifying thought, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. This was not part of the plan, not the escape she had envisioned. But it felt more real, more true, than anything she had ever felt before. They had planned to try and get into town that morning, to see if the phone lines were working, to figure out the next steps for her car. Logan had the truck ready, the few head of cattle were fed, the morning chores done. Charlie was dressed in the borrowed clothes that now felt surprisingly comfortable, her small duffel bag packed. They were just about to leave the porch when a vehicle appeared at the end of the long dirt driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. It wasn't the local sheriff or a repairman. As it got closer, Logan's brow furrowed. It was a large, white van with satellite dishes on the roof and lettering on the side that he couldn't quite make out from this distance. Close behind it, another car and then another, smaller vehicles, also speeding up the drive. A knot of unease tightened in Logan's stomach. This wasn't right. Charlie, standing beside him, went rigid. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and trembling. Her eyes, fixed on the approaching vehicles, were wide with pure, unadulterated fear. "Oh no," she whispered, the sound barely audible. "They found me." The lead van screeched to a halt in the yard, followed closely by the other vehicles. Doors flew open, and people spilled out, holding cameras with long lenses and microphones. They were talking loudly, excitedly, a cacophony of voices that shattered the quiet peace of the farmyard. "Ms. Kingsley, Charlotte Kingsley, is that you? Charlotte, over here. How long have you been here? Are you all right? Are you being held against your will?" Logan stared, stunned, at the scene unfolding before him. "Ms. Kingsley? Charlotte Kingsley?" The name clicked into place, tumbling from the headlines he'd occasionally glimpsed at the feed store, the whispers he'd overheard about a missing heiress, a runaway bride. He looked at Charlie, her face pale and drawn, her eyes squeezed shut, as if trying to block out the onslaught. The woman he knew as Charlie, the quiet, unassuming woman who had helped him mend fences and laughed at his chickens, was a billionaire's daughter. She hadn't just been getting away, she had been running, fleeing a life he couldn't even imagine. And she had lied to him. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He felt a wave of cold, bitter betrayal wash over him, drowning the fragile warmth that had begun to grow in his heart. Every shared meal, every quiet conversation, every moment of connection, suddenly felt tainted, a performance, a manipulation. Reporters were swarming towards the porch, their questions relentless, their cameras flashing. One particularly aggressive man pushed past the others, shoving a microphone in Charlie's face. "Ms. Kingsley, can you confirm you fled your wedding? Are you here voluntarily? What is your relationship with this man?" Logan, propelled by a surge of protective anger and hurt, stepped forward, placing himself between Charlie and the encroaching reporters. "Get off my property," he growled, his voice low and dangerous, a sound honed by years of dealing with stubborn livestock and the occasional pushy salesman. The reporters, momentarily taken aback by his intensity, hesitated, but they were like a pack of wolves, sensing their prey. They continued to shout questions, angling for a shot, a quote, anything they could use. Charlie, finding a flicker of strength, opened her eyes. They were filled with a raw, desperate pain that mirrored the turmoil in his own heart. "I'm fine," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I'm leaving now." She looked at Logan, her gaze searching his face, pleading for understanding, for forgiveness, for something he wasn't sure he could give her in that moment. His face was a mask of hurt and confusion, his eyes, usually warm when he looked at her, now cold and distant. The betrayal was a chasm that had opened up between them, wide and terrifying. I have to go," she said again, her voice breaking. She turned, grabbed her duffel bag from the porch, and without another word, pushed past the reporters, heading towards one of the waiting cars that clearly belonged to her entourage, who must have arrived with the news crew. Logan watched her go, his feet rooted to the spot, his mind reeling. The farmyard was chaos, a whirlwind of flashing lights and shouting voices, a stark, jarring intrusion of a world he didn't understand and didn't want any part of. He felt exposed, vulnerable, his quiet life ripped open for the world to see. He saw the reporters trying to get a picture of him, yelling questions about his relationship with the runaway heiress. He turned and walked back into the house, slamming the door shut on the pandemonium outside, plunging himself into the sudden, echoing silence of the empty kitchen. He leaned against the closed door, his heart hammering against his ribs, a knot of pain and anger twisting in his gut. She was gone. The woman who had brought a flicker of light into his dark world was gone, leaving behind only the bitter taste of deception and the lingering scent of her perfume in the air. He felt like a fool, like he had been played, his genuine feelings trampled by a woman who was clearly running from one life straight into the arms of another, leaving him and his struggling farm as nothing more than a temporary, convenient hiding place. The media circus outside continued for what felt like hours. Reporters knocked on his door, shouted questions through the windows, tried to take pictures of everything. Logan ignored them, retreating into himself, the anger and hurt a burning fire in his chest. He paced the small farmhouse, the silence amplifying the chaos he felt inside. He replayed every conversation, every shared look, every touch, trying to decipher what was real and what was a lie. Had any of it been genuine? Had she felt anything for him? Or was it all just part of her escape plan? The thought was a bitter pill to swallow. Eventually, the media frenzy began to subside, the vans and cars slowly pulling away, leaving behind only trampled grass, muddy tire tracks, and an eerie silence that felt heavier than before. Logan ventured outside, surveying the damage. His quiet haven had been invaded, his privacy shattered. The world she came from had crashed into his, leaving destruction in its wake. He spent the rest of the day working, the familiar physical labor a welcome distraction from the turmoil in his mind. He fixed the rest of the fence, cleared brush, anything to keep his hands busy and his thoughts at bay. But every swing of the hammer, every push of the wheelbarrow, was accompanied by the image of Charlie's frightened face, the sound of the reporter's shouts, and the stinging realization of her deception. Days turned into a week. The initial shock and anger began to fade, replaced by a dull ache, a sense of profound loss. He still felt betrayed, yes, but the memories of the good times, the quiet conversations, the unexpected laughter, were harder to dismiss than he wanted them to be. He found himself looking at the mended fence she had helped him with, the organized tools in the shed, the way the chickens still lingered near where she used to stand, and a different kind of pain, a softer, more melancholic ache, began to surface. He picked up one of the old work boots she had worn, still caked with mud from the fields. He held it for a moment, remembering the way she had clomped around the farmyard, so out of her element, yet so determined. He put it down gently, a lump forming in his throat. He avoided the news, the papers, the television. He didn't want to see her face, didn't want to hear the details of the life she had returned to, the life of wealth and privilege that was so utterly alien to his own. He tried to convince himself that it was for the best, that they were from different worlds, that anything between them would have been impossible in the long run. But the quiet ache in his heart refused to be silenced. One evening, weeks later, as he was getting into his truck, his hand brushed against something tucked into the pocket of his worn flannel jacket, the one he had lent her that first morning. He pulled it out. It was a folded piece of paper, crisp and white, utterly unlike anything else in his truck cap. It was a letter. From Charlie. His heart hammered against his ribs. He hesitated for a long moment, the letter feeling heavy in his hand. Part of him wanted to throw it away, unopened, to preserve the illusion of righteous anger, to protect himself from any further pain. But another part, the part that still remembered the quiet strength in her eyes and the genuine warmth of her laughter, needed to know. He unfolded the paper, his hands trembling slightly. The handwriting was elegant, fluid, like something from another era. He began to read. Logan, if you are reading this, then they have found me. I am so sorry. More sorry than you can possibly know. My name is Charlotte Kingsley. Not just Charlie. And yes, I was running. I ran from my own wedding, from a life that was meticulously planned for me, a life where I felt like a character in someone else's story, not the author of my own. I didn't mean to deceive you. When I first arrived, I was terrified and just wanted to disappear. Charlie was just easier. A way to be someone else, someone without the weight of expectations and obligations. But then I met you, and I saw this place. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could breathe. The quiet, the honesty of the work, the sheer resilience it takes to live here. It was everything my old life wasn't. You showed me a different way to live, Logan. A real way. You showed me what it means to be strong, not because of how much money you have, but because of your character, your connection to the land, your willingness to help a stranger even when you have nothing left to give. You showed me a kindness that felt genuine, not bought or negotiated. And you saw me, not the heiress, not the runaway bride, but just me. The part of me that loves watching the light change on the fields, the part of me that finds joy in collecting eggs, the part of me that just wanted to be useful, to belong. I know the way I left was awful. I saw the look on your face, and it broke my heart. I understand if you can never forgive me. I lied to you, and there is no excuse for that. But please, believe me when I say that my time here, with you, was the most real I have felt in my entire life. The feelings that grew between us, they were not a lie. Not for me. You taught me to mend a fence, Logan. But more importantly, you taught me how to start mending myself. You showed me the kind of love money could never buy. Quiet, honest, and true. Thank you, Logan, for everything. Charlotte Logan read the letter once. Then he read it again. And again. 5 times in total, the words blurring through the sudden moisture in his eyes. The anger that had burned so fiercely began to cool, replaced by a complex mix of emotions, hurt, confusion, but also, undeniably, something else. Hope. He looked at the elegant signature at the bottom of the page. Charlotte. Charlotte Kingsley, the billionaire's daughter. And yet, the words felt genuine, raw, with a vulnerability he recognized from their quiet evenings on the porch. She hadn't minimized her lie, but she had explained her reasons, and more importantly, she had affirmed what he had started to believe himself, that the connection between them, the feelings that had grown in the fertile ground of his struggling farm, were real. He folded the letter carefully, his hands no longer trembling. He didn't know what it meant, this letter, this confession, this expression of feelings he had tried so hard to deny. It didn't erase the past, the deception, the intrusion of her world into his. But it changed things. It shifted the weight of the betrayal, adding layers of understanding and the undeniable truth of the connection they had shared. He tucked the letter into the glove box of his truck, beside the warm registration and the faded maps. He sat there for a long moment, the engine off, the silence of the farm settling around him. He thought about the farm, about the debts, about the endless struggle. He thought about the life he had always known, the life tied to this land. And he thought about Charlie, about Charlotte, about the possibility, fragile and uncertain as it was, of a different kind of future, a future that might just be worth fighting for. He put the key in the ignition, turned it, and the old truck rumbled to life. He put it in gear, turned the wheel, and slowly, deliberately, he drove east, towards the rising sun, towards a city he barely knew, towards a woman he was just beginning to understand, towards a future that was anything but certain, but for the first time in a long time, felt like it held the promise of something real.